All right. Welcome to the Ultra High Net Worth Clients Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Broadhead. We started this podcast as a way to create a central resource of the best financial advisor practice growing tips shared by the most outstanding advisors in the industry, of which our guest today is definitely one. These outstanding financial advisors agree to be on the show and provide a ton of value for free, all in the hopes that our audience might learn from their words. My father was a financial advisor, and financial advisors are the main client we serve, so my marketing agency's mission is to help every financial advisor grow their business in an effort to help the world become more financially secure. Today, we have the rare pleasure of talking with an incredible financial advisor, Matt Zeigler. Matt, can you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you?
Well, I'm incredible and outstanding, and I mean, can we just heap all those adjectives onto me in a recorded medium so I can share and shame loved ones with them.
Yes.
Matt Zeigler. I am a financial advisor with SunPoint Investments. We're a SEC registered investment advisor, about $4 billion in client assets that we take care of. I like to say we are the small side of big and the big side of small. I was at Merrill Lynch for close to 15, 17 years, something like that, and worked at the big company thing, did the wirehouse stuff, but then left, decided I didn't want to hang my own shingle, but I wanted to join a really cool small team. I befriended some people in this side of the industry, and we've been building out all sorts of services from there. So it's a really cool practice. We get to serve people from family offices who've already made their money and now they're doing charities and third, fourth, fifth generational planning. And then we also serve a lot of people on a fee-only basis who are entrepreneurs or people starting up something for the first time and going, I've got this little seed. How do I even turn it into a seedling, let alone a sapling, let alone into one of these ancient trees? And I just love the challenge that communicating with people at all different journeys of wealth, all the challenges it presents.
Awesome. A lot to dig into there. So how did you get into the industry initially?
Well, like all people, a series of disastrous decisions. No. The reality is, and I think this is important because if your life is a straight line, you're doing something wrong. It was not a straight line. I was a music person, so I have a degree in music. I grew up playing music. I was touring. I was working in recording studios. I was doing all sorts of stuff like this. And I was doing it, as I now understand, against a macro backdrop that was working against me. So in the late 90s, early 2000s, when I'm doing this stuff, you might have heard there was this little thing called the personal computer that started to become a big deal. And that plus the internet, between Napster and all the other stuff that came along, was really disrupting that creative music industry. So I'm working in recording studios. I'm doing this stuff in the earlier part of the 2000s, and it's really just hollowing out that market. And so tech was disrupting the market where I was trying to climb a ladder. And I found myself miserable doing a job that I wanted, touring and working in recording studios, but going like, why do I hate this now? Because all of a sudden stuff where there was revenue, people could go record that demo at home or record that album at home. Or if they got the budget was never coming to our mid-sized studio. It was going to New York City or LA. Tech disruption, learned from an early age. One day after recording the 5th terrible local rapper demo, went home, looked at myself in the mirror and was like, maybe I've got this all wrong at 24, 25 years old. Maybe those people I know who took that boring corporate path know something that I don't know. What's the most boring job I could get? And people kept telling me I was good at business, which in hindsight, I now know I was. I just didn't know any of the words because I never went to business school or any of that stuff. But I'd learned that, running a business when I was still in high school and college and everything else. And I was like, all right, I should get a job in finance, I guess. And what job in finance will have me, which turned out to be a part-time teller at a bank. So I started off in finance as a part-time teller in a bank. That job lasted about 2 weeks till they moved me over to another role. That job lasted for about a year and a half till I realized I don't want any of these jobs in the bank, but the only non-miserable person in the office, or at least the only career path I could see myself on. I was like, what's that guy do? He's a financial advisor. Great. How do I get that job? I got that job, but it was also 2008 and then the world tried to end. But somehow I'm still here.
Okay. Wow. So you're ramping this up mid world trying to end. How'd you make it? How'd you power through that?
Well, power through is probably not the right word. It's definitely a painful survival and hard lessons and the goodwill of others too. So I think the main thing about that, and I entered, and again, I just love highlighting the non-straight line of this industry. I enter the industry, I start at Bank of America, I leave, I go to Merrill Lynch, the world tries to end, Bank of America buys Merrill Lynch. Inside of a year, I'm right back at now Bank of America, Merrill Lynch. And this is just the way the cookie crumbles, so to speak, and the global financial system, for that record. So I'm there, I watched this training program that they were like, you want to come here and get trained here, not in that silly bank that you were working before. You want to come get trained with the best financial advisors in the world. We bring Wall Street to Main Street. And that training program went from like 50 people down to 5 people. And it did not feel good to watch that giant hall basically get emptied down to a select few of us by the end. But through some good luck and through some good graces, the best time to get into an industry or get into something is when there's wreckage all around you. And so I got my start in that period where I learned, I did all the tests, I studied all the stuff. Again, no academic background in any of financial advice or investing or any of that stuff. So I came in, I learned all this stuff, was confused to high hell by being like, I don't know what any of this stuff means. I barely knew what a stock or bond was when I started. And now all of a sudden, all the people who told me all the things that were right about the way the world works and diversification, and shout out to the real estate funds that I think I still have the flyer somewhere where they're like, the best decision you can make with your portfolio is to put, 30% of it into real estate investment trusts in 2007. It's like, okay, if everybody that's supposedly smart is wrong, now I am fascinated by why all these very smart people could be so horribly wrong. And I think that's the tenacity that powered me through that point to here.
You were like all of these incredibly intelligent people were just unfathomably wrong. I gotta get to the bottom of this.
Unfathomably wrong. And let me also point this out too. When you're 25 and you see two things, you see the academic accreditations, whatever else. So people with just alphabet soup after their names, PhDs, doctorates, CFAs, CFPs, all the alphabet soup that goes there and we think means something. And then likewise, you walk through an office and you see all these advisors and other people with their fancy cars and their fancy suits and all the stuff that you don't have when you're basically like a broke former musician trying to figure this stuff out at this tender point in your life. And you approximate all that with clearly they know something I don't know. And all industries are really good about building these walls to make you feel like you're on the outside. At that glimpse in that financial crisis of watching these businesses going out of business, of calling my buddy Jeff, who was at Lehman at the time, the weekend they went under, and him being like, I guess I'm going to the office on a Sunday to pack up my desk. Like, what is even happening right now? And you look at that and you go, if this many people can be wrong about something, there's an opportunity here. And in a weird way, kind of wish I realized the same thing about my job in music before, but a few more years under my belt, a little bit more maturity. And I was just driven to say, what caused this thing and how can we better take care of people getting through this? And I've been fascinated by that ever since.
So how have you figured out what that opportunity was and then turned that into, clearly a very successful career?
Very, very illustrious and successful. A lot of this is figuring out how to be yourself in the seat. So one thing, and something that I talk about a lot, is the things that I care about as a human being is I feel like we have a crisis of feeling connected in this world. They call it the loneliness epidemic. There's a lot of labels on it, but just helping people move from being disconnected to being connected is something I care tremendously about. Another thing I care a ton about is I hate feeling uninformed. I hate feeling like the stupidest person at the table or everybody else has this information that I don't have. I love helping people go from feeling uninformed to being informed, not to being a PhD or the smartest person in the room. There's a lot of downside to that, Read the smartest people in the room, read the Enron book, go back and look at long-term capital management. You don't always want to be all that, but going from uninformed to informed is a part of moving from being disconnected to connected. And the third part of this that I believe deep inside of myself is we have to move from being calloused and being jaded or cynical about the world to being curious, to asking questions and whatever else. So when I look at the actual success I've had in this seat and in this job, it really boils down to meeting people on their level, clients of all shapes, sizes, and net worths, and just saying, What are we trying to get you connected to? What do you want to feel more smarter or informed or whatever about? What do you want to learn more about because you feel like you're on the outside of this piece of information and knowledge? And then finally, like, where are you curious? Because I can come out here and present you with private equity and hedge funds or like this crypto or stock or whatever thing, or and how it all fits together. And I can run the Monte Carlo analysis and do all the fancy stuff and do the tax planning around it. But if you don't care about that, if I'm not paying attention to your curiosity, you're going to be callous to that stuff. And if I can connect those three things for people, when I look back on my success in the industry, if you want to even call it that, it shows up in relationships and it shows up in working with people and families with usually a little bit complicated situations where I've helped them feel more connected, better informed, and more curious about what their options actually are in their lives. And there's a lot you can do with those simple three things.
Mm-hmm. I love that. That was very well put. I'm curious. So it sounds like you know, taking these thought frames and applying it to folks that you want to work with, like that must have come out with a specific type of person and who was on your level, who wanted to connect, who wanted to understand their options and engage with them and not just be like, okay, yeah, just do that, whatever. They want to be engaged and understand it and not just take your word for it. How did you figure out who that was? And then how did you find them, get on their radar, and convince them to work with you?
So a huge part of it, and this is evolving very quickly in real time for me. So I'll touch on that too, because I think it's important to say. I think a ton of this, though, for all of us in the space, it comes out of our experiences. So when I was in high school and certainly into college, I was not knowing I was learning business, but I was learning business. I was learning that so in high school, I had my bands that I would play in with my friends and my peers. And then I also had a band that I would play in with all older musicians. And we would do corporate events and weddings and bars and stuff like that. Basically stuff where, a 16-year-old probably shouldn't be hanging out. But I was hanging out at a lot of these things. And this is just the story of my life. I was always
You were
around
curious. Come on.
Yeah, I was curious. I could hang. And I was a unique other thing. My family's very compressed generations. So my parents are both the oldest siblings in their families. They had me in their early 20s. Their parents, so my grandparents, had both of my parents when they were like 20 years old. So I was at my grandparents' like 50th birthday parties and stuff. This is this weird generational compression situation that I grew up in, which meant I learned how to talk to older people across generations all growing up. So if you mix in that ability to communicate across generation with what I learned growing up, so I'm playing in these bands and I'm the 16-year-old or the 15-year-old or the 18-year-old in the back of the back room at the club because I can't sit in the other place because they're like, we don't want your kids sitting at the bar here, band later. So send them in the back. And nobody had smartphones because it's the 90s still. So it's like, they're not leaving you like a Sports Illustrated or a Time magazine to read in that back room. So you have the contract and the rider and you're like, oh, why does you put the van in the LLC? Why do you do that? Oh, it's limited liability. Okay, so you set this up so if you get in an accident, you don't get sued. Oh, that's the way this works. Oh, and the pay, here's where you deduct this. Here's how you treat people as 1099 employees. I'm learning all this stuff, but I don't know that this is useful information. This is just what people do in a band. So then you get to college and like you're setting up an LLC with your friends and you're like, oh, here's how you keep the Department of Labor out of your hair. And your friends are like, who are you? 20-year-old who knows about the Department of Labor and IRS rulings? Like, what is this? I didn't know any of that was valuable. That's why other people were telling me that I was good at business. So when I start in the financial advisor space, appealing to business owners or appealing to people in that same space became really important to me. So if I'd be out and talking to people and I'd be hearing about a business or something, I'm just a default curious person. And now I start hearing how they're doing something and I'll be like, wait, did you ever think about trying it this way? Or what's the hard part about figuring that out? And they're like, I can't figure out if I should own the real estate in this entity and lease it back to the core entity or not. It's like, oh, okay. Like that, all of a sudden now stuff goes off in my brain. I'm like, I can help you do that. Or now you start to build a network of like, I know attorneys and accountants and other people who can help you do that. So to me, a lot of this and where the clientele and the types of people we work with tend to be people who are trying to figure stuff out. Back to that disconnected to connected thing. They usually feel like they're at a bit of an outsider. So it's like they've figured out something where they've got something that's working, that's clicking. Hey, we're swinging hammers, and all of a sudden people want to hire us to fix these houses or renovate these properties or whatever else. How do we turn this into something real? Or I've got all these units and they've turned into this rental empire. Like, what do I do with all these houses? And thinking about, man, my wife would be really mad if she inherited all these things. And how we unwind this? Where do I write the agreement to do that? Diving into those situations and saying, not only are we going to help figure out what to do, but when you work with somebody like me or my firm, my whole thing is, how do I make sure you understand that? How do I communicate that back to you? How do I make sure that not only do you feel connected, but you feel informed in these decisions? Big part of that is shielding you from the stuff that you don't need to hear, but making sure you're laser focused on the stuff of going, oh, if you want to do that, I can show you the steps that we have to take to get you to that point and why it aligns with the rest of your values. That's as much a part of who I am in my DNA and my upbringing as a kid as it is engaging with people in public so that they can see these are the types of questions that get asked when you hang out with what were all the words? Crazy, outstanding, most successful person. That's it.
Incredible.
Incredible, beautiful, talented.
Yes.
Yes.
Lovely.
Keep on, replay all those adjectives from the beginning, just before this clip.
You got it. That's awesome. In an interesting and unique way, it almost seems that your background and experience and just perspective and taste and interests are as perfectly aligned with a financial advisor service as it was, for the music industry.
In a ton of ways,
even better.
In a ton of ways, yes. Maybe better, more profitable. Making more money than I did recording like bad rap demos. The story that I love to tell about this is one of my greatest points. So I always wanted to be a music producer as a kid. That was something that I became crazy obsessed with. I'm having a weird moment in modern pop culture because did you read the Rick Rubin book, or is he culturally on your radar?
I've
heard of
listened to multiple podcasts with him on it. I have not read his book.
You've seen bad LinkedIn takes on Rick Rubin wisdom?
Of course.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So growing up in the 90s, Rick Rubin is like probably, if not the first producer that I become aware of, that's not like, I don't know, George Martin or something like that, is the first person that all of a sudden a bunch of my tapes and records and other stuff, I'm like, wait. I turn over the Run DMC cassette and the Aerosmith cassette and the Red Hot Chili Peppers cassette and the, I don't know, Beavis and Butthead cassette or whatever else, and Metallica and Slayer. And I'm like, his name's on the back of all these things.
Yeah.
Like, who the hell is this guy? And what is this job, producer? And how do I get that job? Because I was listening to all different types of music. Mine was blown. We started doing the Johnny Cash stuff because I was obsessed with The Boy Named Sue 45 from my parents as a kid. And I'm just like, all these styles of music. I love all of them and they're part of my childhood. And here's this guy bridging all these gaps. So I chased that a lot growing up of like, how do I sort of become that? And a key observation was you become that by being able to listen to these people and help get their artistic vision out into the world. Because a lot of times when you're a creative, being a creator and being a consumer, being an editor are two very, very different roles. And the producer really steps in that editor, that clarification stage. Artist comes to you with a song or an insight or whatever it is, and now you help shape that messaging back to the world. That translation mechanism is a very different hat than when you're producing or creating for yourself. So I had my like, oh my God, I'm finally like approaching Rick Rubin moment in the studio 25 years ago or so now at this point, and I'm recording this woman, extremely talented, acoustic, like sort of folksy-ish in that era tradition of, I don't know, like Ray LaMontagne and whatever, Ani DeFranco, like offshoots were there. And she's like, I need this to sound more yellow. And I was like, I know exactly what she means right now because we've spent enough time together that her just saying this sounds more yellow has clicked in my brain and I know what to do. And I think about that a lot in terms of financial planning or financial advice too. It's the client is the creator. I am the editor or the reframer of this thing. And to borrow an expression from the great Rick Rubin, he would refer to himself as like, I'm not a producer, I'm a reducer. I'm going to take this down and hone it into
Mhm.
what that core thing is and get alignment. And I look at a lot of my work as how do you pull that into alignment? One quick offshoot, because I also, as a person who's adored this man through his career, find it really funny that we post like the yoga, like Rick Rubin as like weird yogi spiritual target sign quotes all over the internet. And I just want to remind people, this guy did all sorts of crazy and weird stuff in his life. This is the guy getting the neighbor above him in NYU kicked out of school. And as she's getting kicked out of school because he's playing music too loud because, he's founding Def Jam in his dorm room. So the parties are a little bit crazy. He's holding the vacuum cleaner upside down and vacuuming on the ceiling and driving her out of college. And every time I see one of these like yogi-isms of him being all zen on LinkedIn and somebody's like, this is in my morning meditation with Rick Rubin, I'm like, never, never forget that this guy is the king of highbrow, lowbrow. And that's actually what makes him interesting, not this yoga mat pamphlet that you're throwing at me.
Yeah.
Sorry. Quick aside.
Yeah. No, that's you're
But that's
inspiring
the
me. Go.
nuance. That's the
Yeah.
nuance. I love, love, love knowing that nuance is out there in the world. That's what makes the world interesting.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think, you who was it? There was like a basketball player that I really liked back in I don't know, decades past. I can't think of his name, but he also played soccer and he also played tennis. And they're like, why do you waste your time like playing these other sports? He's like, it makes me better at basketball to like know these other things. And he was popping in my head as you were talking, like, all of these disparate things that, to a layman, it's like, what the hell does that have to do with financial advising? You're like, well, actually, everything.
Well, actually, everything, which is another thing that I'm a broken record on repeating this. That's not a weird sub comment on the Rick Rubin podcast, Broken Record, although I am a fan and very fitting that him and Malcolm Gladwell would become friends over the years for all reasons mentioned before. But it's this idea of I love encouraging both clients and other people in my personal work that I do with Cultish Creative. That's like my personal archive and self brand. And that's just
Mhm.
telling people you have to play more with your networks, and networks plural. And they're plural because you have networks of ideas and people in and around your life. I'm wired to just collect all these dots because I know, like Steve Jobs said, you see them looking backwards is where you see the story. Behind you is how all the dots connected. And you're like, oh, there's the story. That's what played out. It's like when you watch a movie and you're like, now I get the plot twist. Thanks, M. Night Shyamalan. Water kills the area. Yeah, whatever. So the idea is that the dots in the background are the clear and coherent story. Your goal going forward, though, is to pick up all these dots and then create new stories with them. And you can do it
Mhm.
with various levels of intention. So for me, I'm just wired to just be looking at all these dots all the time. I have systems and ways. I've been writing a daily blog for 7 years and running now, where it's just like, no, I'm just dot collecting. All I'm doing, dots and complete dots. And if I collect enough of those, then when I'm sitting with the client who's got a background, and it's funny, friend of mine and wonderful hedge fund manager, Jason Buck, who, trained to be a professional athlete and was a roommate with Tim Howard at the academy down in Florida in the 90s. Tim Howard, the famous U.S.
Goalie,
soccer, goalie for the
keeper.
U.S. men's national
Yeah.
team, and, plays in Belgium and plays in Europe and all this stuff. Now comments on TV. Like, he's like, what people don't tell you is like, when you're in that top 100 of athletes, like, it's really hard then to get into the top 50, and the top 50 are the only ones who are going to go on to play at the national team. So you meet somebody like Tim
Mm.
Howard. He's like, Tim Howard could 360 dunk on me. Like, we're 18 years old, and this guy can 360 dunk. He's like, all the advantages become very apparent very, very fast, even when you're cream of the crop, like how much of these guys can do.
Mhm.
But now Jason and I will go off to the side and talk, and he runs a very interesting volatility hedge fund. But we'll talk about, like, everybody talks about Jordan. No, he talks about Rodman. And this guy, Chris Cole, wrote this wonderful paper. Do you ever see the Dennis Rodman paper? Do you know the thing that I'm about to tell you about? Like, why
No,
Dennis Rodman's
no,
like the greatest enabler basketball player of all time?
no.
So there's these crazy stats about how when Rodman's on the court, the team scores like 4 or 5 times more points than when he's off the court. And it's all because nobody rebounds better than Rodman on that era of the Bulls team. Like, in the NBA, bar none. I don't even think anybody's ever touched the records that he set. And they're none
Wow.
of the records that show up in the data. The only one that shows up in the data on the look through, and Chris Cole wrote this beautiful paper about this years ago relating to finance, was like, Him getting those rebounds and those passes is what enables Jordan and everybody else to score the points that they score. But again, if you take Rodman out of the mix, you don't see that. I love collecting these data points when I meet somebody who's like domain specific knowledge about basketball or business or something. It's like, I got a really cool story for you. How do we now use this in your life to make you understand something better? Like, what are the proverbial rebounds in your business? And how do we make sure we're getting more of those rebounds to maximize your points on court? And how do we think about it through this lens? Because that's the way a person like you thinks about the world. Constantly searching for that. That's how you understand something should sound more yellow. And that's just the way I'm wired.
Yeah, it's a very engaging way to be wired. Just your perspective and thoughts and just the stories that percolate up when discussing finances that can, typically be a pretty dry chat. Have you found that, it sounds like you've been doing a daily blog, you said, for 9 years. Have you found that creating this content, like having this perspective, creating this content from this perspective, has this attracted like-minded investors to want to work with you?
So, and I think this is really important for the advisors who are either creating content online and sharing it in various social media platforms and whatever else. If you think your content is going to get you new clients, it might, and sometimes it will. But the best thing you can start to do is start to understand what is your unique way of communicating with probably the clients you already have. Start there and say, when I talk to them, what are the things that they engage back and forth with me on? So I say something in a certain way, and a client I already have comes back to me and says, oh, that's really interesting. I never thought of, I don't know, whatever boring crap normally people talk about. I didn't know that the CAPE was 3 standard deviations above its long-term average for this many years running. Maybe this is a paradigm shift, whatever that is. If you say that and your client is like, oh my God, tell me more. You take that sign of engagement and you go, okay, I want to create content around fostering that engagement from somebody else out in the world. Conversely, the other thing you want to always pay attention to is what are the things that you do and they share? How do people talk about you when you're not in the room? Key example of this might be whether it's a piece of content or same thing. Oh, the CAPE is 3 standard deviations above its long-term average. Did you know? And somebody's like, that's fascinating. I have to tell my old college roommate exactly that piece of information because it's so cool. Everything you do is basically a function of, if you want to grow your business or get referrals, because at the end of the day, most finance intake doesn't just come from cold outreach. It comes from at least lukewarm referrals. And you want to look at everything you do, all the conversations you have, and say, what is engaging that people want to actually talk about more than just me spouting information at them? And what is shareable? What do they actually want to send to somebody else? What I've realized in our own business and with Sunpoint is there's sort of like Matt Zeigler and the Cultish Creative personal brand. Then there's Sunpoint, the business entity, and how those things work collaboratively is probably the best way to put it. Because a lot of my personal brands, if you want to call it that, me as an individual, is I'm a weird little guy blowing around in space on a lot of different topics, as you could tell. Illustrious, though, very illustrious. So I'm out there blowing around in space, but it doesn't seem to connect back. However, when somebody is talking about me or sharing something that I did, it's usually based on those things. And then they're like, oh, well, wait, this is a financial advisor person? This is what he does? I have a financial advisor. All he does is talk about why the CAPE is 3 standard deviations above its long-term average. And here's this guy telling a story about, this options trader friend and how he, once got tipped thousands of dollars in a Texas wine bar to play Sweet Home Alabama. That sounds like a more interesting conversation. And that's kind of the goal. Yeah. So for all people, you can get clients from content. That is a very, very real thing, but you must ask first of your content. And the best place to look is with your existing clients. How does it engage them and what do they share? And then you want to lean into that. For me personally, the things that engage people are usually me making these weird connections, creative connections between people and ideas and showcasing them how I do them. And then they want to share stuff like me having conversations with these people, which I capture and I put in public to say, this is what it's like to talk to me. If you want to pay me to turn this type of attention on you, get in touch. And that's the way that works.
Yeah, I think you were touching on something that is so valuable, and that's, having interesting, relevant stories that match the examples you're trying to convey. I think that is such a slept on skill, and something that really makes a difference. For your clients, and potentially your most important clients. They're like, I stay with him because he's entertaining as shit and he's interesting and he always has some wild story that's relevant to what he's trying to explain to me.
And cares. I think this is the other part that comes back to it. Like you can be entertaining as shit, but like really what it boils down to is like, do they care about me?
Hmm.
And that's another thing in the type of stuff I do, and I hope it comes across this way because it's supposed to come across this way. Like I really care about this stuff. I wouldn't be telling these stories if I didn't find them incredibly interesting on my own. That's the way I'm default
Hmm.
wired. So realizing this is true of myself, and it may not be true of you, or it may not be true of all sorts of other people, not you, the proverbial whatever colloquial you or whatever, you all out there on YouTube or whatever. The
Y'all.
other y'alls, use guys is my local way that we say this in
There
Pennsylvania
you go.
here in
Yeah.
Pennsylvania. Use guys. Listen, got two tree ideas for you. The idea is you got to figure out what works for you. And again, track it back to what makes people engage with the stuff that you're putting out there and what makes it shareable. And if you can solve for those two things, you'll start to do it. For me, a big part of it is I care enough when I talk to somebody else in a podcast or on an interview that I'm giving. You show up on that virtual call or in that physical room with me, and you're like, now I'm getting that same level of attention. And more often, that's where a lot of clients come up or come back. And like the greatest compliment ever is, getting reached out to somebody got reached out to somebody who's like, you know, hedge fund alternatives, all stuff like that. And he's like, can you talk to me and my family because you speak my language, but I feel like you can translate all the stuff that you're telling me to my spouse, who's in a totally different field and does a totally different thing. So if you can
Yeah.
speak hedge fund trader with me, but also speak, like how do we know we're going to be okay with the second home or with, grandkids in college or whatever down the road to my spouse. If you can reconcile both of those worlds, and I think you can because you have enough ADHD and focus to pull this off, can we hire you? And that's a recurring theme in my client work as well.
Hmm. Amazing, amazing. That's awesome. I relate deeply to this. I moonlight as a screenwriter. I
There
think
you
your
go.
love of music is akin to my love of film and cinema. And I think much like yourself, I know way too many, deep cut Hollywood movie stories that I can then leverage to explain some concept that I am trying to explain. And you've unlocked your superpower, my friend.
Well, but like that too, because one of my favorite episodes of this show, Just Press Record, I host, where I bring two people who otherwise would never meet, and I put them in a barstool conversation style interview with each other. So I did one
Mm.
with a guy who's a online music critic, this guy CT Reese. He does critical analysis of mostly horror movies, but all sorts of stuff online. Wonderfully interesting. And I put him together with basically an estate planning attorney, Fraser Rice, is New York City guy, and like absolutely wonderful. And all we did was talk about like movie tropes and the way like stories and structures and plots and characters and the economics of the industry of like how B-list
Hmm.
people can turn into actual careers and why this is important in the feeding system of like Hollywood and everything else. And what's amazing is on face value, there's no reason that conversation should be interesting.
Mm.
But behind the scenes, we talked about the careers of actors. We talked about why tropes in horror movies enable what they do as businesses and franchises and all the doors they open. And it was like, it's one of the most entrepreneurial conversations you could ever have at like that meta layer. And it's just film analysis. It's just film analysis. It's just talking about stuff that they're nerds about. And
Yeah.
it's a beautiful thing. I picked up so much from hearing the two of them go back and forth on that stuff. And all the more respect to your film dreams here. We got to get you out there talking about that stuff more often.
Yes, yes. We're working towards it. That's really an interesting premise for a podcast. I've been podcasting for 10 years and have done my fair share of interesting premises. That's a new one on me. Odd pairings.
Odd pairings in a unique setting where you just try to have a organic conversation. But I mean, that's,
Yeah.
as I keep telling people, I'm like, this is just networking. I'm just turning the camera on for this. Like, this is how I meet people in the real world. This is when you're standing in the airport lounge and somebody asks what book you're reading, and you look at them and you're like, 99% chance you actually don't want to know about this book I'm reading, because I don't think you'd be interested in. This happened to me. This is a real story from a couple of weeks ago. I'm like, I'm rereading the Miles Davis autobiography. Like, I went to school. I studied jazz. This is like a deep interest. I read this book in my 20s and I wanted to reread it in my 40s. And somebody's asking me, like, oh, what are you reading while you're waiting in line? And you're like, I don't know. Do you want to hear about heroin addicts in the 50s? Like, what am I supposed to say to you? But so after starting to talk him out of like why he doesn't want to hear about the book, now I'm like, at least I'll give him a couple things. And by the end of the conversation, it's like, yeah, I have a new friend in the world because now we're comparing notes on this other stuff. And yes, spoiler alert, he was not interested in Miles Davis at all. He was just trying to make small talk. But I'm going to want to go deeper. And that's a habit that you practice in the real world and wherever else. And for people as advisors, if that's the kind of thing that people will engage with you on, and then they're going to want to go home and tell their friends about afterwards, just lean all the way into that stuff all the way through life. It makes life a lot easier and a lot more fun.
Mm. Amen to that. Awesome, Matt. This interview was wildly entertaining and amazing, of course, and
Outstanding,
talented,
illustrious.
and I could ask you questions for the rest of the afternoon, but I will respect your time. We're actually already over, so I appreciate you going along with me. My final question for you is an open-ended question, and you can take it in any direction that you like. And that question is, what are you working towards?
So I will take this, I'll just take it back to those three core values. And I think about this all the times. The transformations I'm trying to create in myself and in the world is I want people to feel more connected to the people around them and to the work they do, to the people they serve. We're in a wildly disconnected world right now in the US and globally. So I want to help people just feel more connected to other humans, not as identities or political ideologies. Connect to other people as humans and feel that you are connected. I want people to feel more informed. I don't want to feel like they're in the dark or they're having information withheld from them in some callous way, which right into the third thing. I want people to feel more curious and to feel okay to ask questions, to not get callous, not get cynical, not get turned off, not turn on something just because it agrees with all their priors or understand on social media, here's all the people in my little filter bubble. That's not a good life. And the financial values are as important as the personal values in this space. Because if we take care of clients, if we take care of the people in my family, my friend group, and everything around me, meeting people like you, Chris, on the internet, who just show up and you're like, this guy's doing a really important service in the industry of connecting advisors to other advisors and professionals and sharing these backstories. Your marketing work, you're doing the same thing with your firm. You're helping people to find connection, to feel better informed, and to just get more curious to go out and ask that second question or third question or fourth question. If we do more of that, we do more good work in the world. The whole world is a better place when we do that. I believe that right down to my core. And that's really what I'm working towards. I don't need to be, Netflix isn't calling me. Did Netflix call you? I hear that they're looking for podcasts. Did you get the Netflix call?
No, I must have missed it.
Yeah, maybe check your clearly your spam filter. Probably caught it. It's probably in the junk email box.
Definitely. Yeah.
I'm not getting that invite. I'm good with that. I'm good with that because I'm enjoying meeting and helping the people that I can meet, help, and do stuff with. And it doesn't need to just be some performative exercise. And I think if all of us could aim a little bit more towards that, we have a far, far better world when we're hitting 60, 70, 80 years old down the road here, as God willing, you and I both make it.
Amen to that. Matt, where can my audience find out more about you?
The best places to find me are, so cultishcreative.com is my personal website. If you want to see my personal archive, 7 years running, soon to be 9 years. I don't intend to stop. Daily writings. I do that just for myself, but I share it with the world because people ask me to share it. And so there it is. It's me having one complete thought a day. You'll find all the links to my socials and the YouTube channels and podcasts on there if you're curious. And then Sunpoint with an E on the end because we're fancy. Sunpoint Investments, plural.com, E and the S. Don't forget those. They're critical. But sunpointinvestments.com is the firm. That's the RIA. And again, if people are, whether you're just starting on the journey or at the family office level with lots of complex assets and situations, we know how to get people from that seed all the way up to that ancient tree that's in the middle of town with the little fancy fence around it that people, gaze into gloriously, and then distribute it back down, take those seeds and plant them and grow new stuff. And that's really rewarding work. I love to do it every day. cultishcreative.com, sunpointinvestments.com. I'm easy to get in touch with.
Awesome. Matt, thank you so much for taking the time to come on my show. You are an exceedingly interesting person from, I don't want to say a financial standpoint, from a world standpoint. Your ability to connect these seemingly disparate elements is very impressive and inspiring, and of course amazing, and awe awe-inducing, wonderful, parent proudening, if you will.
Oh, I don't know.
I could go on
about that one. Yeah.
But no, man, you're a really cool guy, and I think the industry is lucky to have you. You have a very unique and powerful and engaging perspective that you're sharing with everyone that will listen, that connects them to you, connects them to their goals, the community, the industry, and that's amazing. And I'm really glad we can do a little bit with this show to spread that message further. So thank you for doing what you do, brother.
Thank you, sir, for doing this work. It's really important. It's really important to share these stories, especially with younger people coming into our industry, and remind people we got to talk about this. Life is not a straight line. It's a scary world out there. Just have a little fun. And I applaud you, Chris, for doing this show and doing stuff like this where give people space for these conversations to exist. It really matters. Thank you.
Absolutely. Amen. Awesome. All right. Well, to all our listeners out there, thank you so much for tuning in, and keep on growing out there, everybody. See ya.